guys, they like us. They really, really like us over at CBR.com. And before we get into this video, of course, I want to remind you that it is brought to you by our friends over at HellebardGames.com. Hellebard Games makes the modules that they'd like to play, whether it's for OSR, 5th edition, or Castles and Crusades. Old School is in play at the table, and you can check them out on DriveThruRPG or at HellebardGames.com. That's Hellebard Games. So, if you recall, a little while back, a couple of weeks ago, CBR.com, James Lynch over there, and I'll link to the original video I did about that and all the articles, wrote a piece, an opinion piece, about why he thought first edition AD&D was objectively the best D&D. And of course, that's something that I heartily agreed with, and I liked the article quite a bit. But it hasn't stopped there. I thought, okay, it's a one-off, maybe they're just looking to bulk things up a little bit. No, James has come back with a pair of articles in the last few days, and I could have split this up into 2 videos, but honestly, I didn't want it to seem like I was just trying to feed the algorithm. So let's take a look at these over at CBR, and again, I'll link straight to these down below in the description. Let's take a look at this first one. This is from 4 days ago, and this is why first edition Advanced D&D's character rolling system made players better. There are many ways to roll a new character at the start of a game of D&D, but one older method fits the game's themes better than the next. And of course, right there, the splash is the beautiful full-color wraparound piece from one version of the 1E AD&D Dungeon Master screen. And he jumps right into it. There are few more defining moments in any Dungeons & Dragons player's life than rolling a new character. It could go on to determine the playing experience for years to come if all goes as well as planned. Of course, characters level up and learn skills, and players learn how to command them with greater proficiency as the campaign goes on. Regardless, the numbers assigned to the 6 core stats will dictate a character's strengths and weaknesses from conception till death. The various editions of D&D have offered recommendations for the best way to roll these stats, and it's safe to say the approach has changed over the years. 5th edition promotes a relatively free-form method of character creation in which players decide who and what they want to be going into the process, and the generation of scores is a relative afterthought, with roles being assigned to the most appropriate stat for the class they've chosen. This wasn't the case in 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and the game was all the better for it. Oh yeah, and we get a detail from another Trampier piece there. And Miracall the Chaotic, his ride through what I deem are probably the streets of Greyhawk, but maybe it's different for your campaign. Creating a character in Advanced D&D could be a bruising experience. The original guide to rolling characters left the dungeon masters and player with a few options. There was some slightly more unusual system, one of which involved rolling 3d6 for each score, creating 12 characters, and picking the best. The generally accepted rule remains the same. Roll 4d6 and choose the best of the 3. Or as we say, roll 4d6, drop lowest. In the most recent versions of the game, these scores can be assigned to any stats, but in AD&D 1E, it was broadly accepted that players had to roll in the correct order. Now, I will take exception to that a little bit. It is, with the 4d6 method, it is arranged to taste. This meant rolling strength followed by dexterity, then constitution, and so on, until the stats were filled in. This brutal but purist system was very much seen as the Gygax way of doing things, and often left potential new players with a decision to make. With the rules relating to having a minimum ability score for certain races and classes, it could quickly become apparent that certain combinations could be off the table. For example, Rangers had to have a minimum constitution of 14, Paladins required 17 charisma, and half-orcs were not permitted dexterity beyond 14. And of course, as many of you are first edition AD&D fans, you know that it's not just a minimum constitution of 14 and a minimum charisma of 17 for rangers and paladins respectively, but I think we can roll with this. He is essentially right. AD&D's rolling method has a distinct and realistic advantage, and I think that is a Jeff Easley piece there. It's a lovely one. A party about to die in front of a beholder. They're not about to throw down on it. They're about to be thrown down on, right? This method might make the game seem unnecessarily restrictive, with players not able to create the characters they envision. To counter this rolling system forced players to think on their feet and grow into the shoes of their heroes. I agree. Too often, players come into D&D expecting to immediately be a great hero when there is no reason that this should be the case. At level 1, a player's representative in the game should be lacking skills and unsure of themselves as they set out into the wide world for the first time before they move on to more difficult settings. As the game progresses, the character will find items, weapons, and armor that negate the harmful effects of low ability roll, but that shouldn't be the case from the start. Not having a character that excels in every area also backs players into a corner and forces them to find creative ways out of a situation. Definitely agree with that. If a player's strength is low but their charisma is high, they aren't going to be able to bend bars of a cell, but they may be able to whisper into the ear of a card to persuade their release in exchange for some vague promises. That's reaction and counter rolls, man. It also allows a good group to complement each other's skills, with everyone serving a specialist role and operating within a niche that makes each person feel unique. Couldn't have said it better myself, James. Wonderful, wonderful. I am going to point people to these articles, James, because what you're saying here is brilliant, and I think you guys will largely agree. Though more recent character creation systems are undoubtedly more forgiving, this early version of D&D remains the strongest. Players might not get exactly who they planned from the outset, but they can grow into a role as the game goes on, which makes the experience all the more rewarding. Boom. Mic drop moment. Am I right, folks? And he hasn't stopped there. This article just came out. Now, you guys might remember, if you follow the live streams, of course, we did an extensive deep dive of the GDQ series. So let's see what he's got to say here. Advanced D&D's GDQ adventures are still the most complete campaign experience. The storied history of Dungeons & Dragons includes some good and not so good modules, but AD&D's GDQ still sits at the top of the tree. Boy, does it. And of course, Errol Otis, you got, it could be a Clavdra, or it could just be some drow captain there throwing down on an adventurer, but I love that piece. I've actually got my color copy of the module autographed by Errol Otis right on that. Modules make up the backbone of any fledgling Dungeons & Dragons campaign, providing a narrative framework for dungeon masters to either use in their entirety or as a foundation to build upon. Over the years, a lot of modules have been released to remarkably varied degrees of success. The second of the novice modules, the Forest Oracle, is regularly cited as one of the worst ever released, and a huge disappointment after the challenging fun of N1, a rare misstep from early TSR efforts released for the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Hey, if you guys want me to cover N2, please let me know in the comments below. On the other end of the collection of modules that fall under the Giant's Drow or Descent and Queen of the Demon Web Pits heading, more commonly abbreviated to their codes G, D, and Q, comprising 7 individual modules, which had further releases as compilations. Of course, you had G123, D12, D3, and Q1 after G1, G2, G3, D1, D2, D3, and Q1. And you had GDQ 1 through 7 as a super module. But we continue. Let's see. They cover levels 8 through 14 and serve to challenge experienced players in very different ways. To this day, they remain the greatest modules put to paper in this edition of Dungeons & Dragons or any other. We have another Trampier piece there as a party throws down against Nosner or one of his lieutenants. GDQ can be played as individual adventures or one long campaign. That's what I plan to do. The first thing to bear in mind when starting any of these modules is that they are all, at the very least, good to play through. Some go far beyond that, offering some of the most memorable and dramatic moments and encounters in any of D&D's many settings. G, or Giants, comprises 3 modules of increasing difficulty, with players able to fight hill, frost, and fire giants across the experience. What starts as a simple enough investigation into hill giant raids soon becomes a far grander and more engrossing story of clandestine alliances. Now, if you're just coming to the channel, and you're not familiar with these modules, and James does not mention it here, these are all very high-level modules. And the G123 comes with pre-generated characters, so if you want to jump right into these with high-level D&D characters, you can. But I will warn you, the experience of leveling up to the point where you can play these modules gives the players a chance to thoroughly learn and understand First Edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, rather than being thrown into the deep end of the pool, albeit with a little bit of a lifeline in the pre-generated characters. But let's continue. The D for Drow or Descent modules task the players with exploring the Underdark. Okay, but... in pursuit of a Clavdra, a drow priestess. The second module, set in the Shrine of Kutoa, is probably the weakest of all the adventures under the GDQ umbrella, feeling more like an aside from the overriding plot of the D series and only connected via the existing relationship between the drow and the Piscine race. I don't know that I 100% agree with that. But of course, I want to hear from you guys below what you think of James's opinions here when we get there. It's followed by arguably the best, Vault of the Drow, where it finally allows players entry into Erisinlu, the subterranean capital of the Drow, which of course is Ernie, Elsie, Heidi, Cindy, and Luke, yes. The freeform nature of the last module allowed for high levels of customization on the part of the DM and likely made for some of the most memorable playing experiences of the era. Of course, adapting a module to your campaign and going freeform with it, as James points out, is key in any module. The final single module is Queen of the Demon Web Pits, set in an abyssal realm of the Demon Queen of Spiders. While it might be the absolute pinnacle when it comes to early TSR creations, it did pave the way for a lot to come. It was the first time players were introduced to demonic planes, and still acts as a great introduction to the concept which so many later high-level modules relied on. GDQ is made of good modules that are even better together, and Dave C. Sutherland, who wrote Q1, did this menacing drawing of the players squaring off against Loth. As individual experiences, each of the 7 modules holds up well. Having said that, playing through them sequentially makes for the single greatest campaign experience ever created for D&D. I agree, James. The continuing narrative is both grand and logical, as further layers of mystery are uncovered by the group. G1 starts humbly, but by the end of the playthrough, if successful, players will have traversed environments from the surface world in Greyhawk through a subterranean civilization and to another plane. Or planes. Remember, the Demon Web itself has exits to other planes. The release of the Queen of the Spiders super module in 1986 only served to further its reputation. Almost unbelievably, these modules can be further combined with 2 other of releases to make a campaign that is honestly pretty intimidating, starting with the all-time great Temple of Elemental Evil before moving on to Scourge of the Slave Lords and then on to GDQ 1 through 7. Playing all of that can genuinely amount to years of work and serve as the defining narrative of a playthrough, potentially lasting years, depending on the frequency at which a group meets up. You ain't just whistling Dixie, James. Gary Gygax, Frank Mintzer, Dave Arneson, and the team behind Scourge remain the master craftsmen when it comes to D&D storylines. Although I will point out, Dave Arneson did not write these modules. He, not the Temple, not the Scourge of the Slave Lords, nor the GDQ series. Although he is honored a little bit in that Nosnera is Arneson backwards. And the team behind Scourge remain the master craftsmen when it comes... The modules not only surpassed everything that came before it, but retained its position at the very top of the tree until now. Best enjoyed through the prism of 1st edition AD&D. 5th edition conversions do exist with some slightly finicky math, though anyone happy to barrel through the feast hall in the steading deserves their fate, difficult math conversions aside. Well said, James. Those who are brave enough to set off in search of the giants might find that GDQ can pull even a powerful and cohesive party down a rabbit hole they cannot get out of. Wow, what a great review of that series of modules, and what a great couple of articles from CBR. CBR talks AD&D and GDQ, but not for the FBI. But anyway, these are fantastic articles, and honestly, I really hope more is coming from James Lynch and CBR. I know a lot of people have varied feelings about CBR in general, but I think these articles, a couple of tiny points aside, are 100% accurate and spot on. But of course, I want to hear what you guys have to say. So please leave a comment down below. And if you haven't already, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon for notifications, like the video if you like it, and feel free to share it around. We'll be back later with more video fun. Of course, we've got a live stream coming tonight at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow night, live stream and live stream play of 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, so you can really dig your hands into some classic AD&D and see how it's done. So until then, guys, keep rolling the dice. Peace, and I'll see you guys in the next video.